All right, morning grade 7. Welcome to our first lesson on Unit 8. Again, we'll go back to Unit 6 when we go back to school in person, which is hopefully in just a week or two. But for now, we're going to look at Unit 8. And Unit 8 is all about measurements and conversions. So the first thing we're going to learn about is what's called customary units of length. There's a couple things that you should know about that. Often, probably even by your parents and grandparents, we would refer to customary units as the same as the imperial system. So the imperial or customary system is only used actually in 3 countries in the world left that use it: the United States, Liberia, and Myanmar. Those are the only 3 countries in the world that use this imperial or customary system. Canada and really all of Britain and other countries in the world used to use this customary system, but we switched to the metric system in 1970. It would actually be very interesting if you were to call up your grandparents and ask them if they remember that, what it was like going from measuring things in one way to measuring things in another way. So the imperial system is not really used in Canada, but as we go through this whole unit, you're going to think to yourself, wait a second, we use the imperial system for this and for that and for other things. So it's sort of still in Canada, but the most formal way of measuring things is the metric system. So, for example, what we're going to do is we're going to first talk about the customary units of length, so for measuring things. So again, some of this would be very familiar to you. If we talk about feet and inches, maybe you can ask your dad how tall he is, and he might say, I'm 5 foot 8 inches. We often don't talk about how tall we are in terms of meters and centimeters. I would say to you, I'm 5 foot 8 inches, and my sister's 5'5". So that's something that's sort of stuck around from when we used to use this customary units of length. So here we have a conversion chart, and it shows you which lengths are equal to other lengths. So 1 foot is the same as 12 inches. So you can try and picture that in your head. That would be like your ruler in your desk. It's usually about 1 foot and it's 12 inches long. A yard is 3 feet. So often we talk about a yardstick. A yardstick is a little bit shorter than a meter stick that we would have in our classroom. Then we have another conversion where it just shows you a yard is also the same as 36 inches. Then we can talk about a mile. So people will talk about like how quickly can you run a mile. A mile is longer than a kilometer. I think it's about 1.8 kilometers, but don't quote me on that. So what I want you to do with this chart is to just so far be familiar. Can you visualize what's an inch? An inch is about like half of your thumb length, whereas a yard is like a meter stick. A foot is like a ruler in your desk, and a mile is more than a kilometer. So just so you can kind of picture what those are. Now we're going to be using this chart as well as the chart in your book for this lesson. Now this lesson's quite long, so I split it into 2 parts just to make things a little bit simpler. We're going to start with the basics today and then make it a bit more complicated tomorrow. So if you were to look at this chart and I were to ask you, well, 1 foot is 12 inches. Can you tell me how many inches is in 2 feet? Well, I would guess that most of you would be able to go, oh, well, that's pretty easy. It's 24 inches. What you've done there in your head is a conversion because you knew 1 foot was 12 inches. So 1 foot plus 1 foot is 2 feet. So 12 inches plus 12 inches is 24 inches. So that's a conversion that's very easy for you to do in your head. But what we're going to do today is we're actually going to learn about conversion factors, which are the proper steps to solving a question like how many inches are in 2 feet. Now, the reason we're going to do this grade 7, again, it's sort of like algebra, whereas in some of you can just look at this chart and be able to answer a lot of my questions, which is fine, but I want you to learn the steps of using and writing out a conversion factor. Because again, remember grade 7 math is always building to the next thing. So we're going to learn the steps now with fairly easy things, so we're prepared for later when working with more complicated things. So we're going to learn about conversion factors. So a conversion is a fraction, we just worked with those, equal to 1, but using different units. So let's take a look here. 1 foot over 12 inches. That is a fraction, but it's equal to 1 because 1 foot is the same thing as 12 inches, right? It's like if I had a fraction like this, 1 over 1. That equals 1. But what we're saying here is if we were to measure something, a foot is the same length as 12 inches, which means it's really actually the same as good old number 1. Same with 3 feet and 1 yard. It's not actually a different measurement, it's just a different way of measuring things. So if I went to the fabric store and I said I need a yard of material, and then you were behind me and you said, well, I need 3 feet, we would actually be getting the same amount of material. It's just a different way of measuring it. It'd be like the same thing as me saying, I could give you 4 quarters or I could give you a loonie. I'm giving you the same amount of money every time, but it's a different way of measuring it. So that is a conversion factor. And the way we're going to use a conversion factor is by multiplying. So these are the type of questions you're going to be working on today. So here we have a question. How many inches are there in 9 feet? So I'm going to walk you through the steps of using this conversion factor. So you're always going to be using a chart like this. I'll tell you now, I'm never going to quiz you on filling in this chart. Okay, it's not something I think you need to memorize, so you may always, on all your quizzes, etc., use this chart to find the answer. I'm more concerned about, can you use the chart properly in a conversion factor? So I'm asking myself how many inches in 9 feet. What I'm always going to do for the next few lessons, grade 7, is I'm going to start with what I know. I know I have 9 feet. And what I want to do is I want to multiply that by a conversion factor. Remember, a conversion factor, it's a fraction equal to 1 and has different units. Now, what units do I want to use? Well, if I take a look at my question, I want to know how to go from feet to inches. So I'm going to look at my chart and see if I can find a conversion factor where I know how feet and inches are connected. Well, here I have 1 foot equals 12 inches. I can make that a conversion factor. So I'm going to multiply by that factor. So now I have another question. I could write that conversion factor like this: 1 foot over 12 inches, or I could write 12 inches over 1 foot. They both mean the same thing because they both equal 1. But what I want to do when I'm working with conversion factors, the unit you need to find goes on top. So what do I want to find? I want to find how many inches there are. The unit you need to find goes on top. I want to find inches, so I'm going to do this. 12 inches over 1 foot. This is my conversion factor right here. I'm going to convert from feet to inches. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to multiply the top and then divide by the bottom. So I go, well, what's 9 times 12? 9 times 12 is 108. Then I'm going to do 108 divided by 1. Well, that's easy enough. I end up with 108. But what I want you to notice is what cancels out. If I have feet divided by a foot, those both are referring to the same thing, they cancel out. So what I end up with is 108 what? 108 inches. Now in this unit, grade 7, you have to use your units. You need to write feet here, you need to write inches here, you need to write foot here, and you need to write inches in your final answer. So what I'm saying is, I'm saying that 9 feet is the same as 108 inches. I figured that out using a conversion factor. So I multiplied by 12 inches over 1 foot. Now, again, grade 7, I want to reiterate or make my point clear. I did not change, let's say, how much material I had. Whether I have 9 feet or whether I have 108 inches. I'm not changing the amount. I'm changing how I'm measuring it. So let's do that again. Now I want to know how many yards in 24 feet. So first step, write out what you have. I have 24 feet. Now I want to multiply it by a conversion factor. So I find the one that has yards and feet in it. So I'm going to go over here, yards and feet. It's right here. 1 yard equals 3 feet. Now remember, the way I find out which one goes on top is the unit that I want. I want to find the yards, so that goes on top. So here's my conversion. I got it from the chart. 1 yard over 3 feet. The reason that I put the unit that I want on top is so that my other units can cancel out, right? It's sort of like when we do 2 divided by 2, it just cancels out and becomes good old 1. So feet divided by feet, they just cancel out and disappear. So now I end up going, okay, 24 times 1 is 1, divided by 3 is 8. 8 what? 8 yards. That's using a conversion factor. Now again, grade 7, I understand there's a bunch of you that can probably look at this chart and just figure that out. That's fine, but I want you to write it out in your notebook this way because this is what we're practicing for later. Let's do another one. Okay, how many yards in 4 miles? So I write out what do I have? I have 4 miles. And now I'm going to multiply it by a conversion factor. So I look at my chart. Where do I have yards and miles? It's down here. I'm working with bigger numbers. How do I decide what's on top? Well, I want to figure out what yards is. What I want, oopsies, goes on top. 1760 yards over 1 mile. Because look, my mile and my mile cancel out. So now I have 4 times 1,760, which of course I can just do on the side of my notebook. Let's see if I do it right. 7 times 4 is 28. And I get 4,040 what? Yards. Don't forget your units. Those are essential, especially when we get to quizzes and whatnot. So that's how many yards there are in 4 miles. All right, let's step it up a little bit and make it a little bit more tricky. What we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk about double conversion factors. We're not actually learning a new skill. We're just doing something twice. So here I want to go from, I have 3 miles and I want to go to feet. So same thing. I'm going to start, I have 3 miles. But now grade 7, when I look at my chart, here's my miles. I don't have anything that tells me 1 mile equals so many feet. I don't have that, right? Here's my feet. I'm not told how many feet equals so many miles. So this is where I have to do a double conversion. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my miles into yards, and that's going to help me because then I can make my yards into feet. So I'm really just going to do 2 steps. So I want to get into my yards right here. So I'm going to use my conversion factor. What I want goes on top. So I want yards right now, even though eventually I want feet over 1 mile. These cancel out, and I end up having to do 3 times 1,760. So let me just multiply that for a second. And I get 2,280 what? 2,280 yards. So now that I have 2,280 yards, I can do my next conversion factor. 2,280 yards. Don't forget your units. And now I want to go from yards to feet, which I have right over here. Remember, what do I want? I want the unit I want on top. So I do times 3 feet over 1 yard. Cancel out, and I end up with 2,280 times 3. And then I can do the math there, and I get 6,840 what? Feet. So grade 7, a double conversion factor just means that you need to do the steps twice. All right, let's do one last example. How many miles are there in 126,720 inches? So again, this is a double conversion factor because if I look, here I have miles and yards, but I have nothing that tells me how miles and inches are connected. But then here I have, well, a yard is 36 inches. So I can do 2 steps to calculate this. So I start with what I know, 126,720 inches. And I'm going to multiply it by a conversion factor to go from miles to yards. So, sorry, I did that wrong. Back up. I'm going the opposite direction. I want to go from inches, to yards. Ooh, good thing I checked my conversion factor. So remember, the unit I want goes on top. So I have 1 yard on top, and then I have 36 inches on the bottom. So my inches cancel out. So I do 126,720 times 1, which is the same, divided by 36. Let's see if we can, I probably didn't leave myself enough room. So for the sake of the length of my video, I'm just going to quickly do that on a calculator, just so you don't have to watch me try to squeeze that onto my video. So I end up with 3,520 what? Yards. So that's my first conversion factor. I'm not done because I want to know my miles. So I write out what I have, 3,520 yards. And now I want to go from yards to miles. So remember, the one that I want to know the miles. That goes on top. And then I'm going to divide by 1,760. So then I would calculate that out. I would divide by 1,760, and I end up with 2 what? 2 miles. Because if I remember to put my yards here, those would cancel out. So, most important thing, grade 7, always write down what you know first. Then when you write a conversion factor, the unit you want goes on top. So, call me if you have